So, thank you guys for having me. My name is Itzel, and I am an IO psychologist, a neurodivergent subject matter expert, and I'm also an identity strategist. My work is founded in the Unfolding Room, and it is a consulting and coaching practice for women who are culturally complex, and also the neurodivergent. If you guys can give me a thumbs up that you can hear me, that would be fantastic. Wonderful. So, like I said, good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. And like I said, I'm an IO psychology consultant. I'm a feminist scholar and also a neurodivergent strategist. So most of my work is around the question, I've been asking really for years. How can we build work and leadership models that don't require us to disappear, to belong, or show up as someone who we're not, right? Because for me, for a very long time, I thought the only way to succeed was to just keep performing, being the competent way that they wanted me to be, even when it was costing me, my coherence. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about what happens when we actually show up as ourselves and stop performing and actually start mapping. And what I mean by that is when we actually move from masking who we are to understanding how neurologically, physically, and mentally how we work. So, a quick little snippet about me. I wasn't always in IO psychology, but that was something I've always been very passionate about. So, in my work, I do consulting, I do business to business, and I also do recently started doing coaching. And a lot of my work stems from working in tech ed and seeing workplace problems. And my most current research is actually on Latino women in STEM. And so, what I'm doing there now is actually gathering data on the collective experiences of women and how they experience work life balance, self efficacy, and organizational support. So, in my work, I focus on designing leadership and also helping folks develop capacity models. And this is for individuals as well as organizations. I'm also involved in speaker events, advising, and I also mentor college students who are neurodivergent. So, like I mentioned to you about my current study, I am a doctoral student, and I like to say that I'm on my last lap of getting my PhD. On a personal note, I'm a mom. I'm a Frenchie wrangler. Yes, I have two Frenchies, and also an advocate for women who are building careers that are aligned with their brains and values. And so that's really what I'm about. So let's talk briefly about what is the masking habit. So, masking is like one of those terms that's easy to define, but hard to admit. I myself have done it before, and it's often very challenging when you have intersecting identities. Myself being a mom, being a caregiver, being a college student, and also being someone of color, I walk through many different intersections. So sometimes, we mask out of, self-protection, or it could be the way we learn to tone ourselves down, whether it be over explaining, double checking your tone, or smoothing out the edges to, fit in systems that oftentimes don't really cover all of your intersections and all of your identities, right? Let alone your neurotype. Um, and so this becomes an issue because over time it becomes a form of, presence, like, people call it performance, a way of you showing up, right? And this is kind of a form of performance management that we do on ourselves. And it can be very challenging because a lot of times we may step into work in a version not necessarily that we want to be, but it's a version that, the workplace wants us to be. And then, of course, there's underlying things with that. In IO psychology, in me, I can tell you that, the cognitive load of constant impression management is very enormous. And it's not just emotional, it's very neurological, right? Every act of masking is a micro withdrawal from just attention, creativity, and also self-trust. So eventually you become, not just exhausted, but disoriented because you end up code switching from, different identities. And then you also end up forgetting, what it feels like to show up as yourself, unfiltered, even in safe rooms. So it becomes like these conflicting values, right? And I know this because I have lived it. I've walked in corporate offices and, I love to STEM. I am neurodivergent, both autistic and also ADHD. And so, I have stimming toes. And in my mind, I'm like, I can't walk in there with my little Rubik's Cube. I can't walk in there with my stimming toys, right? And oftentimes we can, but we are so predisposed into living this double life of code switching that it becomes very habitual, right? So, it's a survival skill that we develop, and you slowly kind of start rewriting who you are. You tone it down, you fit in, you become that easy to work with person. And it's a language of adaptation where you end up losing yourself. So let's talk about the wake up call. So, as y'all know, this is when adaptation turns into you erasing yourself, right? So let me give you some context here. So several years ago, when I first started working on my doctoral coursework, and this was in 2020. Yeah, I know it's been quite a minute, but this is what a doctoral, program requires you to do. So I was also doing that, and I'm still parenting. My daughter is 19. She's neurodivergent, and my husband is a combat veteran. And, on paper, when I first started this journey, it was like, okay, I can do this, just one more thing. I was thriving, realistically, academically, professionally, and personally. But inside, I felt very fragmented. And I say this because every space I entered, I expected to, show up as a different version of me, right? I had to be this calm, academic person. I had to be the patient caregiver. And at the same time, the upbeat sort of Latina colleague who never says she's tired. Like she's always showing up to help other people. And over time, that came really really a lot for me. I remember sitting at my desk one night staring at a paper. I couldn't finish it. I was, honestly extremely tired from performing all these roles. Um, and I had no idea what balance actually felt like. So that moment for me was a serious turning point because I realized that, I was really masking with resilience, and this was not a sustained way of living, right? I felt like I could not be myself with all those layers. Like I had to perform and always show up, to serve others, to show up as the expected way that they wanted me to be. So, alignment with that, I learned, that it's how we stay alive in our work. And evidently, that's not sustainable, right? So this was me, that adaptation forced me to, lose a bit of myself, right? Because I was juggling multiple roles. And so I was really fluent in performing, right? So there was bits of myself that I lost, and, I was quietly depleting. And, when my diagnosis came, I think everything came full circle. And I had to, realize and go back and say, okay, wait a minute, this isn't working. So, how do we go from masking to mapping, right? So, this is going to be the practice of noticing and naming and designing around your actual wiring. So, when I say mapping, I mean, paying attention to the data within your body, right? Your behaviors and brain. This has to do with already giving you your cognitive bandwidth, sensory threshold, energy peaks, and emotional triggers. So within IELTS psychology, we talk about a lot about self-efficacy, and I'm a great follower of Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory. And this pretty much says, this is the belief in your own ability to manage your challenges, and how it shapes your environment, right? So for neurodivergent professionals, self-efficacy often gets hijacked by environments that confuse, our compliance. So if we're not paying attention to these things, that self-efficacy becomes to, believing in the fact that we are working towards, fitting those norms that they want us to fit in the workplace. So how do we take back our power and our self-efficacy? Well, we map, mapping is how we do that, right? It's the moment you really stop asking, okay, how can I fit here? And really just start asking what conditions help me function at my best. So this isn't about, okay, I'm going to, have my morning coffee or doing things that feel good. It's really more about using an intelligent way of your self leadership. So again, mapping is your awareness, being aware of the patterns, self-efficacy and practice, and then also, sustainable success, right? You want strategy, not stamina. So you really need to notice the data in your body and what the brain is also saying. So I'm going to share with you three mapping anchors. And these are going to take, this process a little bit more ahead, right? So the first thing that you'll want to do is observe your capacity, right? I'm sure you guys have heard of capacity and capability. Yes, we may be capable of doing things, but do you really have the capacity to do it, right? And these are questions you'll want to ask yourself, right? So within that, you want to observe your capacity, right? Check out your fatigue, your irritability, the overstimulation, and again, remind yourself that these are not, character flaws based on, neurotypical mentality, right? These are signals. So we can't manage what we refuse to measure. The second thing is redefining success. So instead of asking yourself, did I do enough? Is this good enough? Ask, was this really worth my energy? Right? This small shift is going to move you from the performance metrics, the walking into, let me be that person so I can satisfy somebody else's standards, to more of a personal metrics, right? And the third thing is, align your rhythm with your reality, right? So if your brain lights up at 10 p.m. and shuts down at 2 p.m., stop punishing yourself for being out of sync with the 9 to 5 template, right? We need to understand how our body and our minds work. So, in other words, work within your own capacity, right? With your own rhythm. Mapping is really about giving yourself permission to know yourself well enough and to stop apologizing for it. Because once you actually start walking within your own rhythm and listening to those cues like capacity, you'll be able to function a lot more optimally. So, again, the three anchors are observe your capacity, second, redefine success. Ask yourself that question. And thirdly, align your rhythm. Now, let's look at this as a story in practice. So, as I mentioned to you, I do work with a lot of women. Particularly, there was a woman a while back, and who worked in tech, and she wanted to, really understand why she was so exhausted and just really take more control of her life and leadership, as it was actually, her coworkers and her team noticing behaviors. So I coached this woman in tech. I mean, she's extremely brilliant. She's late diagnosed. I think she was late diagnosed maybe about a year ago. And she was the first in her family to work in a major film. She told me, that she felt like she was bilingual, and she was not, because of the many roles she had and switching back and forth. It turned into burnout, right? She was running often on caffeine. Like the days she was really tired, she was having 2, 3 cups a day. She was masking in the meetings, and really it was taking a toll of her and her body. So we really talked through her day, and all she changed was actually her rhythm, how she was doing things. So she shifted a lot of her analytical work to the afternoons. She sort of started building, this 5-minute recovery ritual, which really helped her between meetings. And she set, a boundary around after hours. As I'm sure you all know, are familiar with Slack and those messages. So she started setting some boundaries. And within weeks, her cognitive clarity returned, and her leadership was elevated and it improved. And honestly, that's the one thing about alignment. When we actually start paying attention to where we function best, where, is our capacity and our alignment, then we tend to stop performing. And, then we can be optimal at performing our tasks while at the same time being our authentic selves and working within our capacity. So once you remove that friction, the system performs better. And that's what I mean about, when mapping, um, you know, can be full 360 and in its practice. So, as I mentioned from you, once you actually start pointing out those issues and start working through, the capacity issue, understanding how you're working, if you're working as your authentic self or if you're performing, then you'll take more of a role of your own author of your own, co-working schedules. Now, I wanted to close out with a couple of things. First off is, wiring, you know, being someone who is neurodivergent or someone with a hidden or seen visibility. It's never really about a wiring problem. A lot of times, the mapping of, how we work is outdated. So as you move forward today, my hope is that you think about these three anchors, to really level the playing field as far as how you show up at work and, how you're putting your best self, in the workplace. Because remember, self-efficacy is not about, performing capability to fit a mold or to fit, a workplace's need. It's about understanding how your rhythms function. If you are, working at your capacity, not because you're capable, we're all capable, but understanding your capacity, will really help you to, move forward optimally, with your own self-efficacy being intact. So again, as you move forward today, I really invite you to, just pay attention to one small signal, whether that is, fatigue, focus, and where does your energy flow easily, and where does it actually stall? And those signals are, going to be, alignment for you. They're going to be maps. So follow them. And remember that the future of work, is not about, people who can mask the best, but it belongs to people who really know themselves well enough to lead with precision and not pretense. So, in conclusion, your wiring is never the problem. The map is just catching up. So that is all for me today in this fast chat this morning. If you guys have any questions for me, I would say please put it in the chat.